We're really excited to be a part of AWE this year. I'm really excited to be chatting with you folks at the end as well. My name is Elgin. I am the community manager for Mozilla Hubs. So if you folks have any questions about Hubs, feel free to get in touch with me either here or if you're in our Discord, or even if you send an email to hubs@mozilla.com, that will come to me. So we're happy to answer any questions you might have about Hubs or our new Hubs Cloud offering, which lets you create your own version of Hubs on your own server and totally customize it. We've also got Dan in the room who's doing some recordings, so you'll notice his avatar floating around. Now, a few sort of housekeeping things that I want to mention. If you are having trouble with the volume of the audio, so you can open up additional controls for audio on top of someone by pointing your cursor or your controller at the individual. If you are on a desktop computer, you can press the space bar, and that will open up a secondary set of menus on top of the person. And there should be a floating like plus and minus sign at the top of people's head. I really like when I introduce that, because when I mention the space bar, people always find the emojis as well. So I know it's working for at least some people in the room when I get smiley faces and stuff popping up. So yeah, please feel free to use the heart or the clap or even the angry one if you want to express some sort of mood to to the presenter today. So once again, yeah, just point at the individual with your cursor. If you're on desktop, you can press spacebar. If you are on a Quest, it'll be the A button. Just try pressing buttons while you're pointing at someone, and eventually it'll show up. That volume control is also just for you. The volume control is just for you, so you don't have to worry if you want to like turn someone up really, really loud or turn them down really, really quiet. That won't affect anyone else's volume. Someone mentioned name tags and controls appearing at once and not being able to select them. This reminds me that if you do want to turn off the name tags, if they're in the way, you can go to the user preferences in the drop-down menu, which if you're on desktop is in the upper left-hand corner. There should be a hamburger menu that you can press, and then that will allow you to only see the name tags when you're in that sort of frozen state of opening up people's controls. And if you are on a VR headset, if you are on a wired-in one, you'll have to go to your, you'll have to look at the screen that's not connected, that's showing it in 2D mode to see the hamburger menu. Or if you're on a Quest, you just need to sort of go to the 2D mode by exiting from VR to access all your user settings. But hopefully you won't need to. Also, last thing I'll mention, if you're having trouble seeing the screen for some reason, if you point at the object and press F, or if you find it in the drop-down menu of objects in the room, which is in the upper right-hand corner if you're on desktop, you can take a little bit of a closer look. Or if you want, you can fly around by pressing G on a desktop computer, and that lets you kind of take off and go to a different angle if you want. If you're on Quest, the focus mode, I think you just point at something and then press one of the buttons. I can't say which one. And for flying around, if you're on an Oculus Quest, you can press one of the joystick buttons and you should be able to take off. So sorry for that very lengthy intro, but I just wanted to make sure you folks knew some of the different options that you had. Feel free to ping me in the chat if you've got any further questions. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Anselm Hook for his presentation on monetizing web monetization and social signaling.
Hello. Let me get those hands going. Okay. I'm excited to be here. I really appreciate everyone showing up, and I'm really excited to talk about this work that although we've been playing with this internally for several months, this is the first time in public that I've talked about what we're doing. And so it's interesting because we have something at the end I would love to share and invite everyone to participate in. But I also want to talk about the kind of the journey, how we got there. So there's kind of two parts. There's like this new part of this fun stuff that we're doing, but then there's also this story of some amazing, I think, amazing discoveries that I made along the way, which really, for me, were surprising, especially as a kind of a hardcore game developer. So let's see if that we'll roll through the beginning of the deck here. So my background and training was mostly writing video games most of my life. And I shipped a lot of retail, commercial, mass market product. I worked on Dragon's Lair and Lord of the Rings and lots of other video games that were pretty popular. And so, so although I kind of think of myself as a creative and I make a lot of 3D interactive experiences, I also am really connected to this idea of like the pain, like it's just so painful to build an app and to ship it, and you need money so badly, and it's so risky. And so I like for me that's almost visceral, like oh, we're taking all this risk or we're make a thing. And so I can never really separate that because we always have these amazing minds and creatives and stuff. We're making something we really care about, but then also we need to, if we don't succeed, we have to close the business down at the end of the year. And it's happened before where we fail to ship or we fail to get revenue, and then it's over. We can't afford to play anymore. So there's this connection between art and supporting art that for me is really in my bones. It's kind of like I was trained, just to like always be like, oh, how are we going to make this work? And also then I also kind of shifted away from mass market retail. And I started to do research. I ended up in Silicon Valley a lot, did a lot of advising for venture firms, and had a really interesting gig at Park. And I worked actually at Deco, and 60 got sold to Niantic recently. They did a very nice 3D reconstruction and tracking technology. So there's some very cool stuff in that field. And then also weirdly, I ended up doing a crypto venture. So I did a deep dive on crypto also. So it's kind of like this weird intersection of these interests, and it's kind of weird because I ended up being almost like the perfect person to look at this problem when it was raised. Let's see if we can see that all this stuff. Can you see this all properly? Just make sure it's, yeah, okay, great. So, and also I'm helping out technically at Grant for the Web, which is a really interesting grant that if you are interested in getting funding for some of your work, you should definitely apply for it. It also fits into the way we're thinking about how to get people paid. So I want to just talk a little bit about my employer. It's actually the first time I've worked at a company where the values are aligned from top to bottom. You always work at companies that have different goals and different agendas, but this is the first time where the whole organization is committed to this idea of supporting kind of democratic access to the net, diverse access to the net. It's something that's really in our bones, is to really think about people and stories that aren't being surfaced, to help people be seen, and to have their work be supported. And that's really interesting for me because, again, it's another way that this work I'm doing dovetails. And also, although it's a small company with 1,000 or so people, it actually has a huge footprint. And so it's kind of an interesting place to be. So last year, Lars mentioned this idea. He said, well, we have this new technology coming out. We have Firefox Reality. We have new 3D technology. The web's becoming richer in interesting ways. And what's interesting, though, is that it looks like it's a more and more of a hassle for people to get paid on the web, especially in VR, where you don't want to take your helmet and type in a credit card. And you don't want to, if you're a player, you don't want to look at ads, things like that. There's all this stuff happening as this landscape is shifting that is creating new dynamics, right? And so I started to do I was kind of asked to do a dive on this because of this weird intersection I had between commercial retail and crypto. And the question was, what can we do that explores other ways, as a complement to advertising or as a complement to other methods? What can we do to help foster the rest of the ecosystem? So the first thing I did, I just took a quick look at the ecosystem as a whole. And I was actually kind of naive. I didn't really understand the digital content ecosystem in the broad sense. And I was kind of blown away by noticing things like, well, mobile games is $125 billion a year. Mozilla is not a small company. We have like $1 billion a year kind of, budget, right? We're spending half of that on our staff and outreach and all that stuff. And and then you look at these numbers, and these numbers are huge, right? And then you think about how Apple is taking like a significant cut of that revenue in the App Store, and then you're thinking about the kind of dollars floating around in the broad sense, beyond the web as a whole, and then you start thinking about that, and you're like, wow, these industries are gigantic. And so for me, it was just interesting to look at the broad swell of dollars flowing through those economies. And what was interesting also was looking at how dominant advertising is, especially on the web. It's almost like the entirety of funding of organizations like Facebook and Google and Alphabet, it's almost entirely ad-based. Everything's resting on the head of a pin. And if that shifts, it could have catastrophic effects for those organizations. And by proxy for us as well, since a lot of our funding comes from being a landing page. Google gives us cash for that. And so, it's important to diversify regardless of who you are, even aside from positive or negative effects that advertising may have on consumers. There's this kind of risk, right? And so you're thinking about all this stuff and looking at this ferment, and it was just like, for me, it was eye-opening. And there was like this note around how we thought of ourselves, I think, as a long tail of content creators or content creation and support. Like the web is like where you have blogs and you have other content that's kind of like not 3D, immersive, rich, AAA, right? But actually, the web can deliver all that stuff. And maybe the missing piece isn't performance or machine language or stuff like that, but maybe the missing piece was actually more around money. Maybe it was different puzzles, right? Yeah, as Cube 3 is commenting, commerce, right? There's this way that people were acting in walled gardens where they felt safer. Like you go into the app store, you buy a small app, you have some trust that there's some quality there, and it's a throwaway investment, but there's still a money flow that wasn't happening on the web. And it's just very interesting to just look at all that. We all know kind of all these issues, but for me, it was a surprise. And I just found it very interesting. So the first thing that I did after I went and looked at the web as the content as a whole is I just went and looked at content creators. I just asked them, so what are you stuck on? What do you want to do? And we did work to try and get diverse kinds of minds and inputs and voices from different places. Also, because content is changing, we tried to kind of get a sense of where content was going. And people had some very interesting ideas for things they wanted to do that they couldn't do yet. So that was also interesting to me. And I could go on about this for hours. Really, this was...
Are you nodding to nothing? You know I'm talking to you, but you're not listening.
Sorry? Can you repeat that? I'm missing this. I'll just keep going, I guess. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I could definitely talk about this for a long time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and roll through this very quickly because I do actually want to get to some other stuff. But for me, I found it just really surprising. So there's a class of content creators that are good artists, dreamers, visionaries, but they're not necessarily. They're definitely absolutely. It's crazy. Just jumping back, I remember on Usenet when we talked about if we were going to permit advertising on the web, like the conversation has been going on for that long. For people who are not super web savvy but are content creators, they struggle in some ways to get paid. You can set up PayPal, you can set up these systems, but those things have a shape of the kinds of content that they support the most. For example, I've heard that in parts of China, you can buy a book by the chapter. You pay a quarter per chapter. And it's a different kind of payment that the heavier payment services don't support here in the West. And so it's worth noting that when I interviewed content creators, the very plain and simple starting point was that they were frustrated. Another point that that I was fascinated by was that I think that there's been kind of an electron jump. There's a gap between small experiences and then slightly bigger experiences where you're building in 3D assets and content and stuff like that. And that kind of band jump means that you need money up front. That's a change from the way the web was before. And that's one of the reasons why I'm participating in Grant for the Web, to try and fund people to get the money they need before they start to do work. But now I'm going to roll through a bunch of points really quick, just very quickly. So content creators had all kinds of feedback. It wasn't just that they needed money. There was all kinds of other things, like having their content be discoverable. They didn't feel that there was good discovery. There was an idea of knowing that you were the real author, some sort of provenance or certification system you could register that you made something first. There was an observation that if a company like Mozilla ended up in a trust role between creators and consumers, that we might get stuck with having to certify or own what we trust as good content, and that's a very hard role to own. It's not so easy to decide what you're not going to support or certify. One last point. This also kind of blew my mind. I didn't realize that lots of people were making web apps and then repackaging them as native apps in order to get paid. Like, here you are, you built this amazing mechanism called the web, and you can deploy something instantly to everybody. And on the user end, you have security and safety. Your identity is protected and everything. But then everyone bypasses that and ships stuff in the App Store just in order to get paid, or on itch.io or things like that. Like, so that was super, like, oh my God, there's something wrong here if we're leaving the web to make web apps, right? So I just like blew my mind. And so those were kind of the findings I had. And I could really go on forever. Like, really, I learned a lot here. One thing is that these content creators are not dumb. They're highly social. They talk. They know everything. The creators are so creative at finding ways to make money. It was amazingly surprising. And they had impressions about what users were facing. By this stage, I'd only looked at the ecosystem. I'd looked at creators, but I hadn't yet looked at users. So I was starting to get some sense of where users were going. It turns out that as I started to jump into looking at actual users, that it's almost too big to look at. There's an author who has a book called Hyper Objects, where he says we can only really see the surface of things that are very big. And that was what this was like. I really couldn't grasp the entirety of the user issues. I could really only see a small part of it. The first test we ran was just actually in January. And what we did is we had users sign up. And it was a very straightforward test. We just had two buckets. We told users that either they were applauding some content that they liked. So in the Quest, in Firefox Reality, you would come to the homepage and we would invite you to applaud content that you liked. You should be seeing slides. Do you not see slides?
No.
Greg?
No.
Oh, that's bad. How long have you not been seeing slides? Okay. Uh-oh. Well, that's very sad because I had lots of very pretty slides for you that were... Okay.
Your slides, Anselm, sorry, I just found out about this a moment ago as well. One of my colleagues pinged me to say that a few, like I've got it on multiple computers, I've been able to see them, but some people have not.
Okay.
So is it a screen share that you've brought in?
I can share the actual link to the deck.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. That would be perfect.
Okay, hold on just 1 second, and then you can at least tag along on this crazy adventure. I want to do this without switching out of the mode, though. So what I think I want to do is, it's a little bit tricky because I want to actually not quit the actual deck. Just find the... Just a second. While I'm doing that, I'll just talk about the test we did. What we had done was we had segmented the users into two buckets. So one bucket got to actually um, um, only applaud, and the other bucket got to tip 25 cents. So we had two groups. They feel like it's a similar act. You're doing the same act, but in one group you feel like you are. Here is the actual deck if you want to follow along yourself. Um, uh, and I'm on page. Let's see. Right now you might want to roll through them very quickly. But right now I'm on page like 20 or so.
Actually,
or 21.
Actually, the access is denied.
Oh, just a second. I'm going to change that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to, anybody?
I will download them as a PDF file as well, and I'll bring them into the space so we can hopefully, between the two of us, people will be able to see it.
Yes. I made them public now, so anybody try again? Can you see that?
Thank you. It's working.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so now here, this is what I really wanted to get to that I think is so cool, is that, so we have this kind of A/B test, right? We have one group of people who are applauding, another group of people who are tipping a small amount of money, right? Which group of people do you think responded more? It turns out that the group that was the most responsive was the group that were tipping small amounts of money. And that was weird because you're giving up money, right? And it's true that the signal is not very strong because at the end of the day, we did shift the test to not be real money. We just gave you a pretend amount of money. So maybe there's worth doing the test again with a larger audience and having real money. But I believe that there's something here that I named the talk after, which is that it appears that this is a discovery, that money is not just a way to pay people, but it's also a form of signaling or communication, indication of quality. There's a way that we live in a world that's full of spam and noise, and there's a way that it's so easy to just, create ads or create all this fake signal. You can make 1 million upvotes or something. You can just kind of make it look like something has all this energy when it's totally fake. But as soon as you add money to it, all of a sudden it becomes a true signal. And because it's not cheap anymore, it's any cost. Yeah, I would love to, I'm not like a psychologist. I'm not a user tester. I'm a games programmer, right? But I think there's something really here. I would love to do or get a better test done here because I think there's something very interesting here. I'd love to have it be a blind test. This is kind of the heart of what I think is going on. It's that when we inhibit money, when we don't think about money, when we're focused on other things, when we're, say, focused primarily on privacy or primarily on blocking advertising, we're inhibiting some of the energy between people. And so I think in our role as creatives, and especially in a role at an organization like Mozilla, where we're controlling, we have a participatory role in building the fabric, the physics of the world that we're in, this architecture that we frame our conversations in. There's this possibility that we might be inhibiting the discourse. And we may have to take on a role of dealing with money, even though sometimes it feels like it's a bit uglier. It's a bit crass, right? Because money may not just be money. It may also be just as I'm repeating myself, it's something that has this deep meaning for us. So, that's where I surprisingly started to end up kind of in this trajectory, right? But then this idea that Kristen mentions, getting over the hurdles, it's not just hurdles for consumers to like pay that first quarter or whatever, because there's a huge burden of signing up for a service and paying it. But what's happening is that especially in this new world, you can't really have any barriers. I'm finding more and more, and we're doing a new test, I'm finding this here as well, that when we go into this pattern of creating any barrier between someone and a tipping or donation or even paying, that we lose a lot of participants. It's like there's any road bump stops participation. But if you ease those road bumps and get rid of them, people really will participate. So I had been thinking a lot about, well, we're going to build a wallet, and we're going to have to build some sort of crypto backend, and there's going to be a payment system. You load up your wallet and you pay, into it, and then you give money to people that you like. And there are lots of great payment systems like that, like there's XRP Tipbot, which is really fun, and other emerging web wallets and payment systems. But even those, they're not just hard for users, but they're also hard for developers to implement, i.e. Mozilla or Google. There's a lot of people who spent a lot of time building out the formal web payment standard, for example, that we're just now starting to see emerge. And there are standards, but the barriers are high. Just to flesh out those experiences. You can also just move closer to me. You can probably hear me better too. So we started this new test, which I'm pretty excited by. And it's taking us a minute to get this test launched, but we're just launching it now. And I totally am inviting everybody here to join in. What we're doing now is we're going to partner with Coil, and it's a small test, but we are giving away free Coil accounts that you can use in Firefox Reality. And then we're going to observe how a background passive payment system directs money to creators. This approach is one of a variety of approaches we're trying. So, Coil is a separate company, but they have something that's fairly novel that we really like, which is that it's a background streaming payment system where users sign up for a $5 a month fee. And whatever attention you pay to a site, they get a slice of money. It's a flat fee, but they get the more attention, the more money they get. And we wouldn't support a private venture if it wasn't for the fact that they're also doing something else, which is very important for us. Because we're not interested in supporting private businesses. What we're interested in supporting is a standard. And they're supporting an emerging standard called web monetization, which they're and other people are promoting in the W3C. The idea is that if you decorate your website as a content creator with this payment pointer, then anybody like Coil or like anybody else who builds a payment system can throw money at your site. So you had to put yourself in the content creator's feet for a minute. You're a content creator, and you don't want to deal with all this stuff. It's too complicated. But what you do, you just go and get this payment pointer, and you jam it in the top of your website, and you're done. And now, the more attention you get, the more money you get. And so I agree that it's not perfect. But what we're trying to do is explore. We've gone down the other route of no. I would say the trial is for everybody, but we're trying to explore different options. And what makes this option interesting is that this is a kind of a background option. It's kind of like it doesn't require constant attention and constant focus. So what I definitely would love to do is invite people to join. You can just email me directly at creator_compensation@mozilla.com, or if you go to if you go to the
I think it's in here. So this, like, most of them are just on video, but this one's actually in a VR environment.
I can't hear you clearly. Here, let me just wrap up. I'm almost done, and we'll switch to conversation mode. Yeah, I'll repost it. Well, actually, I can type it in the room. So what I would love to have people do is join in and help us with this test. You can also see the invite if you log in with the Quest on Firefox on the homepage. The invite will be there as well. So this is our current experiment. I'd love to get people to try it out. It will help us audit and test, and we'll find the defects here with this method, and we'll continue our process of discovery, and maybe we'll change the world, right? And then I just want to close on some speculation, looking a little bit further into the future. So you notice that there's an arms race right now where there's advertising, invasions of privacy, fake news, a lot of these perverse incentives and perverse mechanics. And it's possible that some of that might be driven by the incentives. We can change those incentives, I think, and it may help. We don't know, it may create new problems, but I do think we need to try out new things. And then kind of further reaching, in the last point I'd like to make, is that there's a way that there's a whole world full of creatives out there that want to speak and share their stories, their local experiences. And there's a way that we all have our local experiences in our communities. And right now there's the idea of highly commodified content from large distributors and large content creators. And there's a possibility I love to think about of us telling our own stories in our own communities and having that be supportable, and kind of a granular relationship to each other in the world, rather than just kind of one of mass media producers. And that's what I love about the web, is the thought of this granular peer-to-peer relationships that are also supportable, that aren't big, not that they're the enemy of money, but that are kind of like small money, not big money, you know, in a very different way than the way I think we think of our love-hate relationship with money. So that's basically it. Talked to lots of people. Lots of people provided input, and that's it for me. I'd love to switch to just talking now about these ideas and get input. Thanks so very much.